first and foremost is the institution. I came here probably 20 plus years ago to this corner of the state to go to Miami, and had never heard of Xavier. So like a lot of people, I was introduced to Xavier through basketball. But once you get to know the institution and the values proposition, the academic traditions, and the quality, first and foremost, as I said, it's Xavier itself, a first-rate institution with that values proposition that frankly, our society needs more places like Xavier today. Secondly, it's the athletic part. There's a tradition and a history of winning here. There's the resources to be successful as well. And I think selfishly, as an athletic director, the thing that you want the most is, again, those resources, the ability to be successful on a national level. And then from a family standpoint, my wife and I, again, you spend 6 years, at least in this corner of the state, you know just what a great area the Cincinnati area is. I'm a Hoosier by nature. My wife is a Buckeye, but certainly we're familiar. I'm not going to call myself an expert of the Cincinnati area, but there's that foundation of familiarity that we at least know how to get from point A to point B most of the time. Our society and some of the issues that we're facing, forget athletics for a second, but that values proposition of you're educating the whole body, not just the book smart piece of things, is real and I think important to the future of again, what we're doing with our students and how we're developing them as people. I think that gets into the recruiting piece of why do you want to come to a Xavier? And yes, the student athletes need to understand that coming in, but is that going to turn a few off? Probably. But you know what? I'm not sure they're great fits for Xavier anyway. You know, I talked that through with Mike Babinski, when he called about the position and whether or not I was interested. You know, the football part, not having football, the budget, the resources are actually deeper here, and the number of sports is the same as well. Bowling Green had 18, we've got the 18 here, but the one big part is, or the two big parts are obviously public versus private, and the streamlining nature that a private institution can see in decision making. At least that's what I've heard from my peers. I haven't been here long enough to figure that out yet. And then the second part is the size of the institution. And you know, to me, being at a Purdue, being at a Bowling Green, and now even at Xavier, even though I'm here in the summer, so it's a little different. I think you know, in any institution, doesn't matter how many students are there, there's a sense of size that you probably don't even have a context of how many students are actually there, because you live in your own little universe. You know, whether there's 1,000 students, 10,000 students, or a Purdue with 40,000 students. You know, I would never be presumptuous enough, Skip, to just take what we did at Bowling Green and bring it here to Xavier, but it was one of the things that Father Graham, after I accepted the position, he laid out 3 or 4 priorities for me, and that is one of them. You know, some form of character development / leadership that is specific to student athletes. And you may remember that the day of the press conference, one of the other things I did say was that was another prong of why I was attracted to Xavier, is the great things that are already done here on campus as it relates to leadership, and the Leadership Academy that already exists here. So what I think will probably happen is, let's take what our coaches are already doing, let's take what's already being done on campus, and then also we may incorporate a few new things and develop a box, so to speak, of leadership and character development that is specific to student athletes. Our coaches gave us the message from an administrator standpoint that they were struggling with their seniors, they didn't have great captains, and how could we improve leadership on our teams? We looked across the country, didn't find a whole lot. So our solution, at least at the time, was we actually developed a class that we self-taught and asked our coaches to put in their 2 or 3 best sophomores, because we thought they would help grow into being captains, and that's exactly how it played out. I guarantee those kids learned as much, or we learned as much from them as they learned from us over the course of the class. And probably the best way we could measure it is we found that somewhere around 75 to 80% of our team captains had been flowing through this this leadership academy. The word academy was probably a little too fancy, but over time we did develop it to take it from sophomores, just sophomores, to then we did something for juniors, then we started incorporating freshmen, and finally the last couple of years even started having prongs go down into the staff and coaches themselves. So just I guess if I had to sum it up in one sentence instead of the 3 minutes I just did, it would be a very intentional approach to leadership across the organization. Probably the single biggest thing you can get out of this is you need to learn more about yourself. Because I think anyone in a leadership position, in order for you to lead or manage, which are very different things, but you first and foremost need to know how you're wired and how you're equipped. So I think we did see that a lot, that student athletes became a little more introspective. Because when you think about it, the reason kids become captains in high school or leaders in high school, it's simply you're the best player, you're the captain. And that's not the truth necessarily going forward, both in athletics and for people who run organizations.
Yeah. What was they talking?
I'm not sure I'll get them exactly in order, but first was anything and everything related to revenue. As we move to the Big East and the priorities that come with that, the message is very clearly that athletics needs to generate more revenue on its own. There'll certainly be an institutional commitment, and that's not wavering, but what are the opportunities we have to generate more revenue? All things Big East. Obviously a huge priority, big moment for the institution, great opportunity, also comes with some challenges, and we just need to make sure that we are big enough for the stage as we head to the Big East, and that we are an equal partner and not just a tag along. The character development was one, and leadership, and then the fourth was a strategic plan. And it's been, you've got a lot of things coming together to make that important right now. The university has just finished its strategic planning process. You've got a brand new athletic director walking in the door on the heels of an AD who was here 15 years. So you take that plus the Big East layer, and it's time to develop a new roadmap for athletics. It clearly needs to be a priority, but it is for any Division I institution, and it's not as simplistic to say it's just going out to people and asking for money. It's looking at really how are we integrated and cohesive across the board, and how we drive revenue or look at revenue within athletics, and even beyond that within the institution, because I think the fact is there's a business side to what we do, and you can't gouge your customers. That's not the message I want delivered in any way, shape, or form. But are we as efficient in operating from a revenue standpoint and image standpoint for Xavier going forward? Absolutely. I've been to 2 Big East meetings in my first, well, even the one was before I even started. And you sit around that table, and a couple of things jump off the page. First and foremost, we're in the right group. Conferences ought to be about ideology and being with like-minded institutions. And that's why the new Big East, I think, makes so much sense on a lot of levels. So that's number one. Number two, it's terrific for Xavier in that it's strategic, not from an athletic standpoint, but from an institutional standpoint. Let's face it, Ohio and the Midwest are not tracking the right way from a demographic standpoint to try to grow an institution. So you have to look a little more national, and the Big East is in the right markets for Xavier going forward. And then the third part is that readily comes out as we talk is that we are built the right way. Every single school in the Big East, the bandwidth of budgets is really tight. Now, we're not the top budget in the Big East, but we're also not the bottom. And we probably have some gaps that we're going to need to address, but we've also got some places that we're built absolutely to compete. So again, are we going to walk in and dominate? No. Again, the bandwidth is too tight. I think the 10 schools are very comparable, but I think we can be very successful out of the gate. I mean, we have high expectations, and Chris, Amy, and the coaches, they understand that. You don't take your foot off the pedal just because you've arrived at this plateau of the Big East. I mean, I told Chris, told Amy, I came here to help you win national championships and get to the Final Four. That's our expectation at Xavier, and thus we need to be built that way. Well, the competition certainly steps up across the board. But Skip, I would also point to it's less about athletics and more about the institution. We'll compete in whatever conference we're put in, but the fact is athletics is the most visible thing that Xavier does. It's not the most important thing, but it is the most visible. And the Big East platform is about taking Xavier and the ability to engage the outside world. Our teams are that mechanism, whether they're stopping in Subway after the game and they're in their uniforms and they're representing Xavier, or they're on national TV in front of about 10 million people. You don't do this kind of a move, you don't make this kind of a move if you haven't thought it through from an institutional standpoint. And absolutely, it's about getting Xavier more visible in some key markets that are important to the university and the national visibility, because we have to think more nationally from an enrollment and admission standpoint as you look out the next 10, 20, 30 years. But also, and Scott Chadwick, our provost, and I have talked a little bit about this. It does reframe the institution a little bit in that you look at our peer group now, it's not only a more external approach necessarily from an athletic standpoint, but also an academic standpoint. That the institution, to fully maximize this, let's make sure we're visible also from an academic perspective, not necessarily the students in the classroom, but our academic side of the house and their engagement from both a research standpoint and also making sure they are using the platform to get the Xavier message out. I think in my role, and yes, I'm the athletic director, and I realize this is the box that I'm accountable for. But I also sit on the president's cabinet as part of a group that's charged with elevating the entire institution. And you have to use your box, and our box happens to be athletics, to help elevate the entire institution. Because the reality is, and I think everybody probably intuitively knows this, Xavier would be just fine if we didn't have Division I athletics, if we didn't have the Cintas Center. These are the things that I can guarantee, or virtually guarantee, would happen if you didn't have the Division I athletic program, because the research shows it. We'd be a smaller institution. You'd be even more regional or local focused in the students that you have than you are today, and you'd probably tip even more to the female side than we do today. So we can all probably list a handful of institutions that we would look more like. And if that's what people want, that's fine, but I don't think that's what people want for Xavier, and that's why we have, again, this platform for the university. Each sport or each school has its own sport portfolio, and that'll be something that we do take a look at through the strategic plan. Do we have the right sport mix, especially under the probably the tangent of from a gender equity standpoint? And I honestly haven't even started to peel that onion away yet. Do we have the right mix of sports from a gender equity standpoint, given our student population as far as percentage female, percentage male? Largely, every school you look at has a little bit different. But the good thing is all of our sports are under the Big East umbrella. We won't have any orphan sports off in different conferences. And again, I think it's a good portfolio of sports that we do have. And now it's our job just to make sure they keep getting better. Great people, I'll say that. That's the first impression you get after you spend just a month on the job. And not just athletically, but for the entire institution. There is not an ounce of apathy in this institution. There's a lot of passion for Xavier. And like a lot of things, it's making sure it's all channeled in the right direction. But sometimes you get into organizations where people are just kind of punching the clock a little bit, and that's not the case here. So that would be my first impression.